It's unknown exactly how many Israelis are currently being held by Hamas or other armed Palestinian groups in Gaza, but several sources have put the number at more than 250, many of them soldiers. Currently, there are over 10,000 Palestinians imprisoned by Israel, the vast majority of them without charge or conviction. Now, despite Hamas claiming that dozens of its Israeli captives have been killed by Israel's indiscriminate bombardment of the Gaza Strip, the movement's armed wing says they still have enough captives to exchange for the release of every Palestinian prisoner. We've already seen Hamas release a handful of Israelis since the war on Gaza began, but with Israel killing more and more Palestinians, is there any hope that a prisoner exchange deal can happen? Let's take a sidebar and talk to Alon Pinkas, the former military attaché to Washington and a veteran Israeli diplomat. Mr. Pinkas, thank you very much for joining us on Sidebar. I want to start by asking about the current status of negotiations between Israel and Hamas through intermediaries. We've seen 4 of the captives with Hamas being released over the past 19 days. There was a couple who were released on the 23rd, 2 elderly women that were handed to the International Red Cross. What is the status of these discussions and negotiations?
Well, I know that they're ongoing, and you correctly pointed out to the fact that it's being conducted via intermediaries such as Qatar. My understanding is that there are other intermediaries involved. There are a lot of people who want to become intermediaries. So I don't know exactly outside of Qatar who is being helpful and conducive in this. The idea is to keep on negotiating and release as many as possible. I don't know what goes through the heads of Hamas. I don't know what their plan is. I don't know if they intend to free elderly or toddlers or babies as a gesture of goodwill in terms of the negotiations. And I don't know, I may be saving you a question here, and I don't know if this precludes a ground operation in the next few days.
So, no, my next question actually is about what's going through the Israeli government's mind in this, because what we've seen obviously is, a bombing campaign, unprecedented, according to even the Israelis' words, unprecedented bombing campaign on Gaza. The amount of bombs that have been dropped have been calculated to be the equivalent of a quarter of a nuclear bomb. Now, amongst those people in Gaza are your hostages, or are your captives, or are your soldiers, or are your non-combatants. And we are also seeing on the other side protests taking place in Israel demanding that Netanyahu's government secures the release of these prisoners. We're hearing reports that 22 of them have already been killed over the past couple of weeks by the Israeli military attacks on Gaza. So what is the priority? Is the priority to inflict destruction on Gaza, or is it to release those captives?
Well, the report about 22 hostages being killed was made by Khalid Mash'al, and he's not someone I take a word from on no issue whatsoever. So I don't know. It may be true. It may be not true. Maybe it's not 22. I honestly don't know. But you asked a very good question on the prioritization process. On the face of it, Israel is saying that while the two targets seem to be incompatible, they are, meaning one is to release or secure the release of as many hostages as possible, and the second is to keep on destroying Hamas. But you alluded to the aerial bombardments. No one has any illusions that Hamas can be defeated from the air only, which in and of itself has nothing to do with the hostages. Obviously, the trade-off here is very uncomfortable, because the more the bombing, the more the firepower, the less secure the hostages are, both physically and in terms of negotiations. Now, the Israeli defense minister stated in the last few days 3 phases for the next few weeks or even months. In those 3 phases, the hostage issue was not mentioned. I'd like to think that it's a top priority, but kept out of the official rhetoric because of the sensitivity of the negotiations. It is a priority, But you have to understand the national mood, the public psyche is such that defeating Hamas seems to be a higher priority now.
I've spoken to other Israeli officials about this issue of defeating Hamas. You've waged, or your country has waged, several wars on Gaza since 2008. This is maybe the fifth one, and in each one of those, the public aim that has been communicated by Israeli officials has been to defeat Hamas, and in each one of those, Hamas has not been defeated. In fact, it has come back stronger. So, for the thousands of Israeli families and friends that have been gathering in the streets of Tel Aviv, calling for a ceasefire and calling for their loved ones to be returned, what do you tell them, and what kind of guarantee is there that you would be able to achieve either of those two goals?
Well, you're absolutely right that there have been 5 rounds, and in each of those, Israel bombastically announced that it intends to eradicate Hamas. But there was a gap between, public statements and rhetoric, especially Mr. Netanyahu's, and the willingness to commit the firepower and the forces required for that. Now, no one has, and no one should have, any doubts or any illusions. If you want to eliminate Hamas militarily, you need to capture the Gaza Strip for 2 weeks, for 2 months, for 2 years, for 200 years. I'm not getting into that. And there's a price to pay. And no one in Israel wants to control the Gaza Strip, and no one in Israel wants to reoccupy the Gaza Strip. So when you announce, you being the government, the Israeli government, when they announced that their political aim, that the political objective of the war is to eliminate or eradicate Hamas, they need to back that with the military means, which until now they have not done. All that being said and established, sir, this round, unlike the previous 4 that you mentioned, is qualitatively different. There have been in excess of 1,600 killed here. So this is a different level, and I don't know about how successful or effective a ground operation is going to be, but I don't think you're going to see a repeat of the last 5 times in which Netanyahu just bragged and boasted and then announced a victory and went to...
I mean, definitely, it has been qualitatively different from before, not just because of the, as you mentioned, 1,600 fatalities on the Israeli side, but also because of the more than 5,000 killed on the Palestinian side, of which more than 2,000 have been children. And here is my question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
How many from the 5,000 plus Palestinians who have been killed in Gaza are Hamas militants?
I don't know. I wish I had the answer for that. Look, I'm not happy about the loss of human life in Gaza. And I'm not happy about and I'm not indifferent to the horrible suffering of innocent Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. But they've been held hostage by Hamas. And
so here, I'm not necessarily asking from that perspective, albeit an important humane perspective. I'm asking from an efficiency perspective. What is it?
Right.
Where is the proof that Israel is succeeding in actually hitting any blow to Hamas when up until this day, despite all of those killings of civilians in Gaza, Hamas is still able to fire rockets and use and infiltrate into the Israeli side of the border?
Well, that's a great point. We spoke about that 2 minutes ago. I mean, anyone who has illusions that Hamas can be defeated from an F-16 or from a precise munition missile is wrong. If you want to defeat Hamas, and I'm not saying it's possible or impossible, but if you want to defeat Hamas militarily, there needs to be a ground operation, house to house, building to building, car to car, bunker to bunker, tunnel to tunnel. That is very costly. So you're asking me how many Hamas terrorists / militants / personnel have been killed. I don't know. I hope as many as possible, but what I think or hope is immaterial. Obviously, Hamas still has, as you said, the capacity, albeit limited, but still has the capacity to return fire.
I'm trying to get into the logic when we're talking about the Israeli captives that are currently in the Gaza Strip. of
Right.
the policy that has been applied over the past 18, 19 days. As you mentioned here, and as the statistics show and the videos show, there is very little evidence to suggest that Hamas personnel in any sizable number have been killed. But there is evidence to suggest that aside from the aside from the Palestinian civilians that have been killed, the Israeli hostages themselves, or captives, however people want to describe them, have been under threat. Even if we're not to take Khalid Mish'al's words for it, one of the elderly women who was released a couple of days ago, she spoke of the terrifying experience that she had when she heard the bombs falling near to where she was being held captive. So there is enough evidence to suggest that actually what Israel is doing is inflicting pain on its own nationals, no?
No, that's a spin, and you know it. That's you know that is.
Those
not
are her
the,
words. It's not mine.
No. I understand, and practically and factually, it's probably correct. But my point is that presenting it as if Israel is not really killing Hamas personnel, is not really hitting Hamas terrorists, but actually inflicting dead and misery on innocent Palestinians, and by thus endangering the hostages, is factually correct. But to suggest that this is done purposely, or that this is done for lack of any other course of action, that I think is a mistake.
All right, let's talk about the Palestinian prisoners inside Israel, because what Hamas has said is that they've taken these hostages or captives, that they've taken them in order to exchange for them. And we've seen them happening before with Gilad Shalit and others, right? There are currently now over 10,000 Palestinians in Israeli captivity. Prior to October 7th, that number was around 5,000. That actually doubled in the space of 2 weeks. Amongst them, there's some 600 to 700 children. Amongst them, there is about 2,000 who are under administrative detention. What administrative detention means for our viewers is that they have not been charged or found guilty of anything. Essentially, they're just what some would describe also as hostages, because they haven't gone through a legal process. What do you believe, or do you believe rather, that the sheer amount of Palestinians being held by Israelis and in the conditions in which they are being held in, do you believe that has led to an incitement for, or a motivation for, groups like Hamas to take captives?
Look, they've done it before, but that's a possibility. Look, if it were up to me, I would seriously consider exchanging everyone for everyone. The 220 for the 10,000, provided that the day after there's some political structure to be built that would prevent this from ever happening again. Now, that Hamas wanted to kidnap people in order to exchange them in due time for Hamas or other Palestinian prisoners sounds like a legitimate war tactic. For Hamas to savagely decapitate babies, burn grandmothers, and kill civilians in a dance party, that's hardly a legitimate tactic.
To be fair, there's a lot of as you say, spin that has gone around with this war. There have been images that have been then disqualified as AI generated and so forth. There is definitely very clear crimes that have been committed over the past 18 days, according to several organizations. What I want to focus here on is when we're looking at the prisoners and we're looking at these process, what we're seeing on one side, and if you don't mind, I'm going to quote here what was said by the elderly grandmother, I believe she is, who was released a couple of days ago. She said about the Hamas fighters that had captured her or had taken her hostage, that, quote, they made sure we had everything. They cleaned the toilets for us, not us. They were very gracious. They kept us clean, kept us fed, and we had the same food that they did. But on the other side, we have...
So it's basically Club Med Gaza. That's what you're saying.
No, that's what she's saying. I'm purely reading her quotes. This is not my view.
Of course she's going to say she has an 87-year-old husband still in captivity and the 220 other people. What do you expect her to say?
Possibly. I just want to say on the other side, and this is what's important here. Only a few days ago, Omar Daragma, who was a Palestinian prisoner, an elderly Palestinian prisoner, was taken into custody by the Israelis, and he died, according to sources, from torture, right? We know that there are at least 13 bodies of Palestinian prisoners that Israel continues to keep, amongst them one who was killed in Ashkelon prison back in 1980 and still hasn't been released. So what I want to ask is, Israel's practices in prisons where they are keeping these thousands of Palestinians that have been criticized by many different organizations, actually, including, for example, Human Rights Watch, or if you don't mind, I'll quote Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur, who said that the occupied Palestinian territories had been transformed as a whole into a constantly surveilled open-air prison, or Beit Salem, the director Hagia Al-Ad, who said that this is not democracy plus operation, but this is apartheid, and she spoke about some of the things that are taking place there. Don't you think that the treatment of Palestinians in those jails puts the lives of your civilians and your citizens and those in captivity in danger?
Yes, I do. But here's the thing. You're taking this to a political level, and you're talking to someone who dislikes the Israeli occupation profoundly. And I've been involved, unsuccessfully, admittedly, in many rounds of negotiations with the Palestinians that unfortunately did not produce anything of lasting value. I don't like the Israeli occupation, but there is a point to be made that we've tried. We were not perfect. We're not at all, innocent of these practices that you're talking about. But we did try. We tried since Oslo in 1993, and we tried in Camp David in July of 2000, and we withdrew unilaterally from Gaza in 2005. And while I'm not justifying the occupation or the practices that entail the occupation, nothing that Israel has done politically or even in jails can justify the savagery and barbarity of Hamas. And you know this, and I understand the sympathy throughout the Arab world for the Palestinians. It's understandable, it's natural, it's human. What I don't understand is why public opinion in the Arab world is not pointing at Hamas for what they are doing to the Palestinian, the horrors they are inflicting on the Palestinians. Forget Israel for a second. And yes, you're right. Our practices in jails are unacceptable to many of us. But to equate what happened on October 7th with this is truly not.
Mr. Pinkas, I'm simply asking questions. I'm not trying to equate anything. I want to ask you just because you brought up Oslo and peace treaties, and then we'll come back to the disengagement, as you mentioned, from Gaza. With regards to Oslo, what happened to Yasser Arafat?
What do you mean? What happened to Yasser Arafat?
Yasser Arafat signed Oslo. He agreed to the Oslo Treaty, but how did he die?
Oh no, you're not going to drag me into conspiracy theories. I don't know. He was abducted by aliens.
Not the conspiracy theory. He was besieged. Well, forget about how he died. What were the conditions? What were the conditions? Forget about how he died. What were the conditions that he was in, and the besiegement of the Muqata'a and his offices?
That's
there.
True.
All the champions of Oslo, what do they have to show to the people of Palestine that engaging, as you mentioned, in the peace process that you have mentioned, brings them any sort of liberation or freedom or justice or equality? That's what I'm asking you.
Well, that's I agree with you, and that's more than a legitimate question, because blaming Arafat for the fact that Oslo in the end did not work is not fair. There's enough blame to share here, and Israel is not should not be exempt from this blame. But there was Camp David in 2000, and then began an intifada, which Mr. Arafat and Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas, thought they can control, and they couldn't control. And then all hell broke loose in 2001, 2002, 2003. And here we are today. There have been successive Israeli governments, certainly since Mr. Netanyahu was prime minister, who refused to negotiate with the Palestinians. Hamas in 2006 and 7 practically took over Gaza. The Palestinian Authority is out of Gaza, as you know. And this whole idea that you can negotiate, that Israelis and Palestinians, led by Arafat at the time, can negotiate and produce something of durable value and sustainable, that blew up in smoke.
Do you mind me asking, you said something about disengagement from Gaza, and here I think there are certain things that are missed from narratives, or at least maybe brushed over, right? Obviously, Gaza has been besieged for the past 17 years. These are according to human rights organizations, according to the United Nations, in fact, according to Israel's own admission. The fact that Israel can cut off water or can cut off electricity or can allow who moves in and out essentially means that they control it. So they do occupy it, albeit not physically being present on the streets of inside Gaza City, but they control land, air, and sea. Here, again, not to diminish or even to put any discussion on what took place on October 7th, but to try and contextualize. In the absence of understanding the practices of imprisoning 2 million plus people for 17 years and to bombard them every few years through Operation Cast-Lead, Protective Edge, and to the end of it, right? How can that be seen as an abstract? Because the Israeli narrative is that what happened on October 7th is ghastly and all the crimes that took place, but it wants to seemingly take that in abstract of the past 75 years and at least the past 17 years. And when somebody like, for example, Antonio Guterres comes and talks about it in the United Nations General Assembly yesterday, in the past 24 hours, there are calls by the Israeli foreign minister to essentially cancel him. Why is Israel scared of the context of where this all comes from?
No, not scared at all. It's just that Israel is pointing at Hamas and saying, okay, we withdrew from Gaza in 2005. In 2006, by the way, against Israel's better judgment, there were democratic elections held in Gaza, and Israel warned the U.S. at the time that allowing this to happen without first strengthening the Palestinian Authority would lead to Hamas ascendancy. Then Hamas executed several hundreds of Fatah members. And before you know it, you have this situation that you accurately described, that while Israel withdrew from Gaza, Gaza is actually encircled by Israel. And Israel exerts all the logistical and humanitarian power, the electricity, fuel, water, and what have you. That's true, and that is the context. The thing is that Israel has been blaming, look, I don't speak for the government. Yeah, you're asking me questions as if I can answer for the government. I am not answering for the government. But the consensus in Israel was that a different approach by Hamas would have produced a different result. The fact that Israel is in fact encircling Gaza is true. The fact that while Israel left, it is still in a different guise, still occupying Gaza, is also somewhat true. The fact that Hamas is a messianic, fundamentalist, terrorist organization that did very little to come to terms with Israel or the Palestinian Authority is also part of that context that you're talking about. Yes, you're right. You know, the oversimplification of saying, well, we left Gaza and look what we got is not helpful to anyone. But we did leave Gaza.
I want to end on a final question, just very quickly. If there was a message to those who are the decision makers currently in Israel, that you believe they should send to the families of those currently being held by Hamas, of which we're expecting those protests to continue in Israel, because anybody who has a loved one taken will want to ensure their safe return. What should the message be from the Israeli government to them, on the one hand, whilst understanding that there are also, as you mentioned, grave mispractices being conducted by the Israeli prison services towards Palestinian prisoners as well?
The message should be this is not the number one priority. This is the only priority. And Israel would do its utmost to ensure their release, including having that dictate military or political actions. That would be what I would expect the government to tell the families. Whether or not they're saying it publicly, they're not. Privately, I don't know. As for the practices that you mentioned in Israeli jails, yeah, look, I know, we're talking when the blood is boiling and the war is still raging, you and I. But believe it or not, I do see out of this tragedy, I do see some silver lining, because I think there's going to be an understanding on both sides that this can't go on, that there cannot be and should not be another round, meaning a different Israeli government and a stronger Palestinian Authority and a severely, significantly weakened Hamas may lead to a new process. I don't want to even call it a peace process, because that would be presumptuous. But I do see a silver lining after this. And part of the message to the families is going to have to be that.
Mr. Alon Pinkas, thank you very much for joining us on Sidebar.
My pleasure, sir.